Hey everyone, I'm back again. Hopefully you saw my presentation yesterday. I'm excited to be back. We have a really great panel. We're going to be talking about this idea of transformation. The people on this panel are diverse. They're incredibly talented and well-versed in what's going on in the industry. So I'm excited to introduce them. Let's get right into it. On my right, on my immediate right, I'm not sure virtually on the screen who's on your right, but on my right, we've got Emma Gold-Utting. I'm going to get each of the panelists to introduce themselves really quickly for 30 seconds. Let's start with Emma. She's from GEOTAB.
Hi, thanks, Gregory. So I work for GEOTAB. I'm the team lead for the Emerging Technologies Solutions Engineering team. So I work with everything electrification, mobility as a service, and then also recently everything sustainability focused beyond electrification as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Emma. Next, I see John Strisower from Kilows.
Hello, I'm John Strisower, and I'm the founder of Kilows, and our company is building ultra-fast EV charging across the US.
Perfect. Next to John, we have Nate Shadoin.
Good afternoon. I have spent the last 8 years in the automotive industry, most recently leading the fleet electrification efforts for Mike Albert Fleet Solutions, which was a full-service FMC. And I am pleased to announce that I just joined NextEra Energy in EIQ Mobility this week, actually. And we are targeting large fleets for decarbonization and electric vehicle charging infrastructure.
Perfect. Thanks, Nate. And then last but not least, we have Ryan Daley.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I am also with NextEra Energy, same as Nate. My background is in fleet consulting, which I've done in a variety of capacities over the last 12 to 13 years. But my focus right now is on helping our fleet clients make the transition from planning to electrify to actually doing so. Looking forward to being here today.
Thank you, Nate. Thanks for being here. And by the way, I was so excited to do the introduction. It's that I forgot to introduce myself. Let me go back. Gregory Skinner. I work for a company called Escalent. It is an advisory services company. We're global, and we spend a lot of time and energy in the fleet and commercial vehicle space, working with and advising clients to help them get the best out of their products, services, and understand where the market is going. All right, let's talk a little bit about transformation. I mentioned to everybody just before we even got on this call that it's exciting. It's an exciting time. The amount of change that's happening is rampant, and then the scale and scope of the change is phenomenal. So I think where we should start is maybe level set, and for each of you, maybe just tell me what your definition of transformation is, because each of us, I'm sure, has something different. Emma, do you want to kick it off?
Absolutely. So for me, transformation is effectively looking at the way that we're doing something today and making it better today and for tomorrow. So for me, it really ties in heavily to the idea of sustainability and ensuring that you're still able to do your business today, still grow, still succeed today, while still ensuring that tomorrow there is going to be an opportunity for you as well.
Right. Okay. Others? Does someone else want to jump in with their version?
Sure, I'm happy to go, Gregory. I think it's an amazing time. I think that when we look back and we see huge transformations that have occurred, like going from landlines to cell phones, we saw that industry happen. We saw the smartphone come in 2007, and everyone has one today. What we're witnessing and are part of right now is the globe's largest change since humanity. And what I mean by that is we are remaking the entire electric infrastructure, the entire energy infrastructure. I mean, we're seeing that fossil is being converted to electricity, and it basically is by far the largest economic shift in human history, and we're all a part of it. And I think that it's obvious why we're all doing this. I think we all have to, and so I'm just excited to be a part of helping make it happen.
So just to be clear, John, you're saying it's okay for me to get rid of my landline?
Do you still have one?
Ryan, what's your definition?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I think transformation is inherently about being open to and at some point embracing change. We're talking about vehicles, we're talking about infrastructure. I think we all know that that's a big piece of change going forward. Another piece that I like to focus on is organizational culture change
Yeah.
as well, which I think is a big piece of what's coming. And I think that some organizations are more ready for that than others, but I think everybody we talk to is getting ready for that at some point. So organizational change and culture change.
Yeah, I really like that idea, Ryan. Because a lot of times when we talk about transformation, we always look at it as some external factor that's affecting an entity, and there's some outcome, but we never really think about it from inside the organization or enterprise and how they manage it. So that's a great point. I want you to hold that thought because we're going to come back to that. Nate, what's your version?
Sure. Yes. Since I've spent the last 8 years in automotive, when I think of transformation, I think very specifically about the vehicles themselves and the powertrains and the shift from combustion vehicles over to electrified vehicles. And not only is it good for the environment, but it's also an opportunity for companies to lower their carbon footprint and also lower their total cost of ownership. And similar to what Ryan said, I feel like there's a lot of folks that have the feeling that there's external forces that are forcing electrification upon us. And so when I think of transformation, I think it's when people can get their heads around that this is actually a good idea and a worthwhile endeavor for all of us to pursue.
Yeah, is the implication there, Nate, that transformation is sort of forced on us?
I feel like certain people feel that way. People that are very brand loyal or vehicle loyal, and I'm again speaking in the context of automobiles and fleets. I do feel like there is a certain segment of the population that feels like this is being forced upon them. But in reality, I feel like the educational component is really important to get them to understand that there's a tremendous amount of benefits that go along with this. And I honestly don't believe that it is being forced upon us, especially as somebody that enjoys racing. I'll be at the Indy 500 next weekend and a lifelong lover of cars. This is an opportunity to move things forward.
So how do we get by that? I totally understand and agree. It sounds like it's one of those, hey, take your medicine. It's going to be horrible, but you'll be better for it. Others, what do you think? What's the pathway to sort of convincing entities that transformation is a good thing, not something to be looked down upon?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to get somebody's mind around an electric vehicle is to actually have them drive one. So if you think about people that drive half-ton pickup trucks for daily drivers, F-150s, Silverados, Rams, Toyota Tundras that don't necessarily use the truck for towing or anything like that. I think once they get in a new F-150 Lightning or a Silverado EV when that's available next year, and realize that it looks and feels just like their existing vehicle, but performs impressively. It's fast off the line. And then they realize that, hey, going along with that, I'm saving $400 or $500 a month or more in fuel and even more in deferred maintenance costs as the vehicles get older. I think people will really start to embrace the electrification of fleets and personal use vehicles.
Okay. Ryan, tell me a little bit about this notion of transformation from the inside out versus outside in.
Yeah, sure. Well, first I'll double up on Nate's comment on the experiential piece. That's huge. At any time we've asked folks in the past whether or not they've driven an EV, it correlates very highly with their willingness to embrace it as a fleet vehicle. But the other piece of that, from my perspective, one thing I've started to notice, and it seems kind of intuitive when you think about it, is, regardless of the type of organization, there's a handful of folks at the top that are making a decision towards electrification, whether it's elected officials or C-suite or sustainability officers, someone like that. A small group of people, but really at the end of the day, it's hundreds, if not thousands or more drivers who are going to be responsible for actually implementing that change. And so I think one of the best ways to include them in the process is to just ask them what they're concerned about. And I think what we've found is things like range, charge time, charging availability factor in, but at the end of the day, they're more concerned about things like cargo space, and vehicle capability than they are some of the things we think they're worried about. So I would encourage folks to ask their drivers, what they're concerned about, and then address the things they're concerned about.
Interesting. Any other comments, Emma, John? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm going to echo Nate's comments around, well, actually both your comments around what happens when people actually do drive EVs. I've been driving Teslas for 10 years myself, and it is transformational. People, when they start experiencing it, I really think we're going to see a big uptick. I think some of the automakers are pretty surprised by how many reservations they have. I think they're kind of surprised by the demand, actually. And as the economics start to, as the cost of the cars get lower, I think we're going to see just massive uptick. So I think it's going to be a really transformational experience in the next few years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think it's also really important that people are really realistic with this. Like, as Ryan mentioned, a lot of the time drivers do have, range anxiety concerns. They want to be able to do their job. Sometimes there's a little bit of a safety concern because there is a lack of education sometimes around what an EV actually is. I know in my own experience, I tell a taxi driver what I do for a living. Immediately, they're worried about, getting electrocuted in the rain or different things like that. So there's often just so much misinformation there. I think as an organization, you really have to take this slow. You should be identifying where it's making sense, because that's going to be your strongest argument to start getting your people on board and be able to push this transformation through and have it be very successful.
Perfect segue, because the one thing I wonder, and this is for everybody, but we often talk about transformation in very grand terms, like on a large scale. Can someone address this idea that maybe transformation is slower? Maybe it should be baby steps in this case, not all in at 100.
Yeah, I can definitely talk to that. In my experience, I've done a lot of electric vehicle suitability assessments, where we're using just telematics data to actually identify where it makes sense today to put in an electric vehicle. And that is kind of your first most powerful tool to be able to do. If you're identifying exactly where these things make sense, you're then not piling up kind of a big argument of bad use cases against it. I think we can all think of many projects that have started and been abandoned because, they weren't implemented in the right way. That implementation process and identifying it and breaking it down to small chunks, so you end up with a big crowd of supporters who are able to then carry it through. And especially as the technology develops, like what is not a good fit today potentially could be a great fit 5 years from now. There's no point putting kind of a square peg in a round hole today.
I would add to that when you think about this, no matter how fast this goes, it has been very slow and incremental. I mean, we've had electric cars since the 1900s, and it was a third of the fleet was electric in 1900s. So, this has been very slow transformation. It's picking up speed now for obvious reasons. The technologies have gotten to the point where the feasibility is there, and I think we've all realized that there's a forcing function that is making it happen too. But I think it is incremental. It's just that it's that part of the S curve of adoption that we're starting to see it accelerate.
Yeah, and I would extend Emma's point, a layer down. I think starting with a EV suitability assessment for whatever portion of the fleet makes a ton of sense. A lot of fleets have done them, but really then the first step is, what am I doing in this procurement cycle? What is happening this year? Which vehicles fit with that EV suitability assessment? Which vehicles am I actually able to get from, whether it's a lessor or whatever procurement mechanism you're using, and it becomes very focused on vehicle by vehicle, year by year, so that this grand plan of all electrified by X year is not totally overwhelming and too hard to implement. It's just 1 year at a time.
Right. So I wonder then, do you feel that, and again, this is for everybody, but do you feel like the optics around electrification and the transformation that's associated with that, do you feel like that's at odds with what's going on internally? And I wonder also if it's maybe a hindrance. So people look at what's going on in the market, they just see the headlines, and then they go, you know what? We can't do that. Like, we can't afford that. Or how are we supposed to roll this out amongst, 1,000 units? Do you feel like that sort of internal conflict exists?
I think so. I mean, I think it's inherent with any big change. Imagine just adding personal computers or cell phones to the workday, stuff like that. I mean, there's no way we can roll out an individual computer to every employee in the company and then let them take it home and now work from home, etc. I think it just, that perception is there because it's such a big potential change.
Mm-hmm.
But year over year, baby steps, people will prove that it's possible.
Okay.
And to add to that, I do think it's important for us all to recognize how much work actually has to go into this. EVs have come so far from kind of the first gen Nissan Leafs, and I think we all know fleet managers potentially got a little burnt by that vehicle at first. But now we've kind of solved a lot of range concerns. It's depending on your type of business, you have more than enough dwell time to charge these vehicles up. But even just starting that education campaign, managing, doing that research to figure out what vehicles fit within your fleet, that's a lot of work on a specific person. And if you're not a person who's connected into the industry, it is so hard to often take those first steps. I know the number of conversations I've had between, the differences between a plug-in hybrid, a mild hybrid, a full battery electric, and the benefits and costs of all of them. It's something that when you're in the industry, it feels so simple, but when you're on the outside looking in, it is a really daunting task and decision to be able to make and manage these changes over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would add to that this is really about mission matching equipment and vehicles for the mission. And, so I think when you start applying a specific vehicle for a mission and you start seeing how effective it is at that mission, pretty quickly you realize, and I think will ultimately drive economics that will make it clear. And so, that's kind of what I'm seeing the baby steps have to be.
Okay. Let's take a step back and let's let me hear your take on transformation from both a supply side and a demand side perspective. So if we look at this, tell me a little bit about where we're seeing the most movement from each of those different parties.
Yeah, I can jump in. I'm glad you asked that question next because I was kind of thinking the same thing as we were walking through the rest of those comments. I think, one thing to make sure that folks are aware of is the fact that manufacturers across the full spectrum of supply have invested hundreds of billions of dollars into electrification. And so to some extent, it's coming whether you like it or not. And so can't get ready, is different than won't get ready. And you probably should, or you're going to end up in a position of not being able to adapt and really, really far behind everybody else. So I think the big improvements that I've personally seen in the last few years is very much on the supply side, because I think the demand side has been there for quite a while. So specifically in light trucks is a place where I'm really excited to see the demand side catch up.
Mm-hmm.
And just to add to Ryan's comments there, I think it's also important to denote the contributions of government here too. Many governments across the world have given kind of hard deadlines to these manufacturers, and it's really pushed the supply side to start being so forward thinking, expanding their capabilities more and bringing new electrified models. Definitely the F-150 Lightning is going to revolutionize the styles and types of fleets that are able to electrify when we're able to get our hands on it.
Mm-hmm.
I would go to saying, look, to put it into specifics for the audience, there's going to be 130 passenger vehicle EVs in the U.S. market in the next year or so. We have companies like Kenworth and Peterbilt and Freightliner that are coming out with Class 8 trucks. So we're going to see trucks. They may be hydrogen electric or battery electric, but we're going to see, everything from trucks through passenger vehicles happening. We're going to see EV tools coming into the market, which are like electric helicopters or, passenger drones. I mean, all of these things that seem really whiz bang and way out there actually aren't that far out there. And so, I think if you start really looking at the industry broadly and what's happening, it really is happening. So the point of being left behind, if you're thinking this isn't going to happen, you will be left behind, because it is in fact happening.
Hey, what are your thoughts on this?
The place where I see the most synergy between supply and demand is your last mile delivery fleets. So you think about your FedEx, your Amazons. A lot of times those vehicles are owned and operated by independent route operators. They're not corporate.
Yeah.
And so I've had the experience of working with some of those clients in the past, and they spend an astronomical amount in fuel, more so this year than last year. Also in maintenance, and yet at the same time they have very predictable routes. They know how far they drive every day, and so identifying a vehicle, which those are slowly becoming available now. You've got Rivian that is supplying the Amazon vans, and you've got BrightDrop, which is a subsidiary of General Motors that will be supplying the FedEx and Walmart vans, and it really just makes perfect sense, and everybody's aligned. You're close to cost parity on the vehicle acquisition price, which means that over the life cycle of that vehicle, the total cost of ownership, especially with gas prices where they are, should be dramatically lower, which just adds money to the bottom line and makes good business sense. I think also the customers that are receiving packages every day, be it a business or a homeowner, will appreciate a quiet vehicle, and also one that's zero emissions.
Right. Okay. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second. So within my role, a big part of what I do is a lot of on the ground contact and interaction with fleet owners, managers, users. There's a guy I know who runs a construction company, and in talking to him, he said, you know what? I'm keeping my eye on what Amazon is doing. I want to see how this integration or adoption of electric vehicles and rollout goes with them. But you know what? I'm going to wait, because I want to see how it all shakes out with them before I invest in this. What are your thoughts on that? Like, is the wait and see strategy, is it useful? Not to wait forever, but to wait for a little bit.
I would personally. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's inevitable that there's going to be people on the early adopter end of the spectrum and the late adopter end of the spectrum. And it's, we're already seeing enough adoption that it's pretty obvious that we're going to see the S curve occur. So it's just a question for each individual and company to figure out where on that curve do they want to be.
Right. But the reason I bring that up is because, earlier we were talking about, hey, you know what? You need to get into this or else you'll be left behind. Like that sentiment is shocking. It really shocks the end user. So is that middle ground of waiting for a little bit? Is that a good strategy?
I would personally say yes, because within that strategy, you're still educating yourself, and that's going to be your hardest hurdle to overcome here. So if you are truly keeping an eye on what bigger corporations are doing and understanding and, looking at their ESG or CSR reports to understand kind of the impact of electrifying in those spaces and what their local communities are saying, it would make sense if you don't have, if you're not a particularly profitable company at this time, but plan to be in the future, to kind of do that wait and see, and then implement something that is tried and tested and going to work for your fleet, as opposed to trying to dip your toe in and potentially doing it incorrectly and harming your business at the end of the day.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a slightly opposite approach. I think it's kind of dangerous to have that perspective right now. It's like the parallel I kept thinking of was like when I came out of graduate school at UCLA, like waiting to find a job until I saw what folks, the graduating class at like Harvard did, right? That doesn't help me. I think organizations need to do what's best for them. And if they want to wait, that's fine. But I think doing nothing is not a very good option. If you're doing nothing now or haven't done anything yet, you're probably already 3 or 5 years behind. And at a very least, if you're not going to buy vehicles anytime soon, you should be starting to figure out how you're going to charge them when you do decide to get them, because I think that's going to be either the enabler or the biggest roadblock for most folks. So waiting to see, I think, is one thing, but doing nothing at all, I think, is really not a good option.
Right. Well, Emma, you weren't saying do nothing though, right, Emma?
No. I was definitely kind of the wait and see education portion for sure. And like completely agree with you, Ryan. There needs to be thought about charging today. Even if you don't think you're going to electrify for 5 years, you need to think about charging today. That is the number one roadblock. It's a lot of people feel it as kind of a hidden expense. You need to be working with your facilities manager. You need these conversations to start today if you're going to be successful as you do this.
Is it not difficult for an operation of whatever size to do that? Like, I mean, because when we think about, projecting out usage, figuring out charging infrastructure within their facility, understanding range, there's a lot of big complex topics there that maybe are beyond the scope and capacity of an organization to do. So how is it possible for a company to plan for the future without either going all in or sitting by the sidelines?
And this is a place where I think, back to my last point, where I was making the comparison or trying to take the opposite side, making the comparison to Amazon, I think, is the thing not to do. Because somebody like an Amazon or a FedEx or UPS is going to have, 30, 40, 50 person analytics shops in-house that can do that type of planning for them. And I don't think most fleet organizations have that. But there are other resources out there, certainly ourselves. I know GEOTAB does a lot of this as well. So there are folks to look through in the industry who will be happy to help other organizations who don't have that in-house capability.
Right. Okay.
I think there's two parts to that. One of them is the in-house part, because fleet operators have to be able to charge their fleets, obviously, when they come back to the barn. But I think there's also, and the problem that we're really directly involved in ourselves is helping to solve the longer distance transportation issues. So, there's a big part of planning around what kind of equipment is appropriate and what, where it needs to be charged en route.
Let's talk a little bit about the impetus for change. So, I really like what we're talking about as far as, it's essential and imperative that you at least be thinking about it, if not doing something about it. When I look at it from an internal perspective, there has to be, and I think Ryan, either Ryan or Emma, you were mentioning this, it's sort of a top-down thing. It's driven by someone who has the vision and the wherewithal to say, okay, you know what, we really need to be engaged in this. But tell me, from your experience and from your perspective, what does it take for a company to feel like, you know what, it's essential, or now is the time for us to be transformative? What are those sort of characteristics that need to be nurtured internally to make that happen?
From my perspective, I think just a lot of accountability. When you take the issue of carbon and greenhouse gases and all that sort of thing, which is what electrification is trying to solve, and only put it on specific departments like your sustainability department, or, it's the board tells the fleet manager to just go and do it, you're really centralizing that responsibility. But if, as an organization, you can make it everybody's goal, add it to, their key performance areas or whatever the case is, that they need to be working in whatever capacity to either help their clients reduce their carbon, to reduce the emissions from their own departments, and really make it a big company goal, you immediately are aligning people in a way that can often make it a lot easier to maintain that energy and that openness to these newer technologies coming up.
Yeah, this is, I like that answer. And I think this is a really hard question to answer. I mean, I think in some respects, you need a top-down push in order to get things done a lot of times. I think some of the opposite has happened in this part of the industry in that fleets end up with somewhat arbitrary goals placed on them by non-fleet people, elected officials or corporate. I think what might help fleet managers who don't already have an arbitrary goal placed on them or something like that would be to be proactive, start to figure out what is reasonable and manage those expectations upward before they're managed downward on you.
Nate, do you have a take on this?
Yeah, I think the motivations can be varied depending on who you're talking to and what type of organization you're within. So I think Ryan made a really good point that sometimes it really does take a top-down push, and that could be coming from the perspective of we have a published sustainability goal, or it could be coming from the perspective that our customers would appreciate and do more business with us if we did back up some of our sustainability goals with moving in the direction of zero emission transportation. I think it can be varied. I think the SEC putting guidance out there for publicly traded companies to disclose their risk as it relates to climate change, which essentially is carbon accounting. I think that's going to be a definite driver for publicly traded companies, at least, to demonstrate that they are moving in the direction of trying to reduce their carbon footprint, especially if they have a fleet. Then they can start doing that within the transportation sector. But I think everybody's got to come together. So it could be a sustainability team, it could be an executive team. But when it gets more tactical into the fleet and the people that are managing that, and also the drivers, trying to get everybody on board and understanding the why of the whys of the reason that we're doing this, as opposed to just this is what you're going to do because we said so, I think is really important, just to get people's mind around and be agreeable with the change.
All right.
I think that it's also it's actually happening in the middle too. I think you've got quite a few people that are being hired into companies and they're driving change from within because they're interested in seeing it. And I also think it's important to think about this, the overall point of everything that we're doing here. It's not just greenhouse gases. Actually, pollution is a big part of this too. Now, air pollution has become one of the major global killers. And so eliminating basically toxins in the atmosphere is an important driver. So I think that everybody can get behind that and in fact are.
And here's the curveball. And again, I love these real world examples too, because they just sort of bring the point home. Guy named Joe, and I'm not kidding, his name really is Joe, super smart guy. Talk to him all the time. He runs a general freight company, and they do some shipping container stuff internationally out of Chicago. Joe is the fleet manager, operations manager. Joe's brother is the mechanic. Joe's dad is the guy who owns it, and Joe's uncle is the guy who, and then they got whatever, and then they have their team. Basically, there is no accounting team, there is no sustainability team. It's like, hey, if I want something done, I'm asking my brother, what do you think of it? I love what you guys are talking about, but there's this reality of sometimes organizations just don't have that structure to deal with this stuff. Or, again, the concepts that we're throwing out there are just way beyond what they're thinking of on a day-to-day basis. But here's the crux. We know that 80% of fleets are 40 vehicles or less. So we're not talking to these big guys all the time. We're talking to these little guys. Now talk to me about how we make something like this a reality.
I think you start with a fleet assessment And that's one of the specialties that EIQ Mobility does within this NextEra business unit that we're working under, which is you're going to identify what type, it's really two parts. What types of vehicles are you driving today? So is there an equivalent electric vehicle available now or in the near future? And then you look at how far are you driving every day? What type of routes or what type of driving pattern or duty cycle, as we say in the industry, is that vehicle doing on a daily basis? And then the third one would be, where does it go at the end of the day? Does it go home with the driver? Does it go back to a depot? Once you've started to back into it and answer those three questions, you can start identifying opportunities for fleet electrification. And it could be, starting with a small group of vehicles, a pilot program, if you will, on vehicles that you're very sure about the routes and there's an equivalent EV that's available today, and then starting to scale that over time as more and more of these electrified powertrains become available.
Okay.
I think from looking at from ports and what's happening in the ports and in longer haul freight, I think that you've got a large percentage of trucking that is independent owner operator, single truck, single tractor situations where exactly the scenario you brought up is what happens. And I think in that situation, the economics are such that they really can't do anything. And so there has to be some financial mechanism that allows them to do something about it. And I think that that's one of the things that will develop, because that problem is becoming obvious with California leading the nation on zero emission imports. I think it's going to really push that point. And so that's something that's going to come up and that will probably lead into an answer to your question.
And just oh, sorry, go ahead, Ryan. Oh, okay. What I was just going to add to that is in kind of really early days of fleet electrification, we used to see a lot more group buys. So multiple municipalities would join together. They would put in one bid to be able to hit those preferential pricing points. For small fleets, I do think we have to start thinking more collaboratively. So if you are a bunch of single owner operator vehicles, find your organizations, try to get things rolling through there. Your organizations are likely also to be able to help you start tackling some of these sustainability things, even if electrification isn't an option for you today. So I would really recommend taking a much more community-focused way to this transformation for smaller fleets, because you will start to see some of those larger benefits that, the Amazons, the Walmarts, the IKEAs are able to get because they have much larger budgets.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the group buy idea is great. It's an idea that's been around for a long time, and I think one place to go to look for something like that is to find your local Clean Cities Coalition. For smaller fleets, to have a local resource that is going to probably be more affordable than hiring consultants. To come in and do big work. Clean Cities is
stop, Ryan. You're talking yourself out of a job.
Did you hear my voice choke up while I was saying it? Like my brain literally tried to stop me from doing it. So I think Clean Cities is a great place to start for a lot of really basic information for smaller fleets. I'd also say getting in touch with your utility customer representative folks and try to find out what they're doing locally to help their customers. One thing we've had some success with is providing some support and assessments through utilities to their customers.
Right.
The utilities
I'll plug our sponsor too. Our sponsor is in the space and is providing data to everybody in the space too.
Yeah.
Someone tell me what you think the formula is. So again, love everything that we're talking about. And so whether we're talking about large fleet or large, commercial vehicle operation or small, what's the formula that it takes to sort of instill transformation within the organization? Like, what are those sort of, magic pieces that once someone embraces it, we can start to see a notable change in the industry?
I'm guessing that watching other companies succeed at a small level or a large level and implementing a small number yourself in your own fleet and seeing what it does. Most companies are going to implement trial programs. They're going to get 2 or 3 of them and they're going to see what happens. We're going to put them on different routes and different missions and see how they work. And as people gain more and more confidence with it, it's going to be, wow, that's actually really pretty cool. I really like that. And, in some ways, it changes your way of being because you're not going to spend time at the truck stop adding diesel. And, you're going to show up at the barn and it's full, ready to go, and it's silent. And so, there's so many cool things about it that will create momentum and get the flywheel rolling.
I think adding money to the bottom line. I think when you begin electrifying your fleets, all of a sudden you have a noticeable drop in the cost of fuel, which is one of the 3 main drivers of total cost of ownership. Typically within these fleets, and not always, but the fleet is a big expense category. So trying to take that expense category and lowering it, adding more margin to the bottom line, becoming more predictable in an unpredictable world of fuel prices right now, frankly. I think some of those financial drivers will really get those that are on the finance, treasury, and accounting side completely on board with this direction.
That's good. That's a good point. Yeah.
Do you think it's a carrot then, Nate? It's like dangle the ROI on this, and then people will start to respond?
I think so, because if you look at what vehicle costs today, and you say if there is an equivalent electric vehicle, typically the acquisition price is going to be a little higher. So it's about educating them and extrapolating those costs over 3 years, 5 years, 7 years of time. So it's not just the upfront price; it's the maintenance, the fuel, and the maintenance cost avoidance that start to make it so it becomes more of a here's your return on investment versus this is just a more expensive capital expenditure.
Nate, I have a question related to what you just said. You mentioned earlier about the SEC and how that kind of accounting will factor into this. When you're looking at the analysis, is carbon cost something that organizations are looking at?
To be honest with you, I'm probably not the right person to answer that question. I think, this is my personal opinion, I think that when the SEC requires carbon accounting and you have big companies with big fleets that use a lot of electricity, they use a lot of fuel, it's going to give media types, politicians opportunities to warmonger certain companies that they perceive as not environmentally friendly. And so I believe that when those types of activities happen, they're going to need to demonstrate and publish what types of efforts they're making to reduce their overall carbon footprint. And so I think that will be a driver of behavior as well.
Okay.
And what I can just quickly add to that is with ESG reporting, oftentimes fleet is not even a line item included at this point in time. It's not really seen as a driver of something that investors are really caring about today. But they should truly, there's so many different things happening, and especially as you start looking a little more international to Europe, they've implemented clean air zones. There's a lot of benefits even in I live outside of Toronto in Canada. Are HOV lanes you're allowed to go in if you have a green plate, and all these other benefits there that add along with kind of the initial fuel expenditure reduction and the predictability that are really going to help your business maintain its advantage as it moves forward. So ESG, I think it's going to be a really important education piece to include fleet in there to ensure that you are showing your investors that you are thinking forward and you are protecting your ability to do your job.
Right. No, that's a great one. As we think about sort of bringing this to sort of wrapping this up, so I want to let the audience know, we're open for questions as we continue the dialogue. But so feel free to start sending in those questions for this panel, because I'm sure they're anxious to answer those. In the meantime, let me ask you all, what's your prediction then? So think I don't know, let's not take it out too far. So let's think next 3 to 5 years. Where are we going to be? Where are we going to be with this? What do you think?
In 2021, new electric vehicle sales were 3% of the market. So if we start there, in 3 years, in my opinion, there's no question it'll be north of 5%. I think it's going to be closer to 10, 7, 8%, maybe 10. I think if we get to 10% in 3 years, that would be a sea change. And that'll largely depend on the supply chain allowing that many vehicles to be manufactured.
Yeah, I'll admit, Nate, you threw me a curveball there. You said in 2021, and I was like, are we going back in time? I was asking the future.
I would echo what Nate said. I would say that if you look at 2021 numbers, because they're available, you find that that California had higher EV sales than ICE sales. Obviously, that's going to be near the top of the country. But the Model 3 was the most popular car in California last year, and I think with 130 models of cars that will be in the market by that time for sure. Again, supply constraints are going to be a part of that, but I would guess that it's probably 10%. I think longer range freight vehicles is a much bigger unknown because of infrastructure and because of cost issues, and freight is sensitive to economics. So that's going to be really interesting to see where it goes. My bet also is that fossil fuels are going to get increasingly more expensive over time.
Yeah, I would echo what both John and Nate have said so far. I think my most optimistic self says 3 to 5 years, we are going to start seeing the kind of long distance and like larger trucks be solved through implementation of other technologies such as hydrogen, because oftentimes that can be a little easier to implement as opposed to kind of true long distance and charging overall. But that being said, like, we're already seeing a huge shift, even just with the announcement of kind of a lighter duty truck, as more and more of the F-150, 250, 350 size trucks have electric options out there. There's a lot more businesses that are going to be able to approach this quickly. Today, it's not an issue of range. It's a little bit of an issue of price, but it has been a pure issue of vehicle availability. And we are starting today to see more and more vehicles be announced. They're being planned. So fleets are really going to be able to hit the ground running much faster than I think I would have ever anticipated.
Yep. And I think my prediction in the 3 to 5 year range kind of follows that same line of thinking, that as we see more vehicles available across more different types of vehicles, the EV experience will become normalized. So folks, when they think about not just fleet vehicles, but their personal vehicles, they'll be able to find an option that looks more, feels more like what they already have now and what they're used to than, I think a perception over the last few years was, subcompact cars that kind of feel like a golf cart. And I think that is changing. And I know I hate to knock on them, but I think that perception will erode because there are trucks, there are luxury vehicles, there are medium and heavy duty vehicles, and the experience of owning and operating an EV is going to be more familiar to folks than maybe it has been to date.
Okay, awesome. I just got a text with a question. It says, the projections that you've made on EV growth over the next 5 years are significant. To what degree do you feel these are going to be constrained by a lagging infrastructure development?
Yeah, the comment that I had from one of our infrastructure folks at a conference last week was, it's an enabler or it's a bottleneck. So I think the utilities and other providers, we need their help to get this stuff done fast. And so organizations who are not thinking about infrastructure yet really need to be.
That is what we are entirely focused on. We see that as a very, very important enabler for sales of vehicles. and perhaps more importantly, for range confidence and spontaneity for EV users. We see the range of EV batteries getting to much higher numbers, like 400 to 500 miles range economically. We see solid state batteries coming in some point in the future, maybe in the next 3 to 5 years. Toyota seems to think so, maybe QuantumScape. There's going to be a lot of change on all of that. Charge times are going to get much, much, much shorter. And that's exactly what we are focused on. So that's a great tee up for us. Thank you.
Oh, wait, it's you who sent me the question.
Amazing how that works.
There's another question here, and the focus here, it says the onset or the implementation of a hybrid strategy to integrate commercial vehicle or BEVs into a fleet is an interesting one. How much does it make sense for a company to invest large amounts in a hybrid strategy?
Is it just a hybrid electric vehicle? Like
No, I think they're talking about, integrating vehicles slowly into the fleet. Mm-hmm.
I think that's the right approach. I think a mixed technology fleet is going to be the norm for a long time, 10, 15, 20 years probably, until there's electrification options across every vehicle size and capability. Maybe a mixed technology fleet is just the way it's going to be in the future, period. And there's no 100% electrification. So I'm very much supportive of that type of approach.
Yeah.
I go ahead, Nate.
I was going to say, I think there's no question that it's going to be a mixed fleet, unless you have a very specific type of vehicle that you're utilizing. So if you think about a black car, a taxi service, right now in theory, they can move their entire fleet over to electric right now. But if you were to take a municipality and you were talking about a municipality that had pool vehicles and code enforcement vehicles, but also had emergency vehicles like fire, rescue, and police, those vehicles would not be wisely earmarked for electrification today.
Right, and I just want to be clear on the question, because some people might think of that question in terms of hybrid vehicles versus hybrid fleets.
Yeah.
And so my view is that hybrid vehicles are not a great idea, but hybrid fleets that's going to be almost automatic for now.
Yeah, and just to add to what John said there, my personal bias, I would call it out, is definitely pushed towards a full battery electric vehicle. The ranges are there for most fleets today, and even for private consumers, it makes a lot of sense to do that full battery electric if you live in an urban area. If you happen to live in somewhere very rural right now, that infrastructure for road trips and things like that does have to be a consideration for kind of a private space. But definitely for fleet, if you have something predictable, getting a few in, it gives that kind of full employee buy-in. I know we've all talked about the experiential piece of driving an EV. There's a lot of people who, once they've been in an EV, find it very hard to go back. It's a great employee retention tool, because you're giving them a much nicer workplace by letting them drive an electric vehicle. You don't have the same shake. It is quieter, and you also are reducing their exposure to tailpipe emissions and other things like that as well.
Right. There's another question here, and I hope I get it right. It came in 2 parts. So it says, I'm curious if anybody's heard of any stopgap alternatives, such as hydrogen-powered trailer generators or something similar for on-site refueling of commercial EVs.
There's definitely companies that are looking at doing more mobile charging solutions. So there are a few different companies that, it's effectively a giant battery on wheels. So you're able to go in there and really charge on the go, which is really nice. What I can say is, for longer term construction projects, because oftentimes, different vehicles are there, you have to charge at different times, you have different people showing up to construction sites at different times. That's really the use case I've heard for this right now. if you want to start looking and like writing in kind of the building of that charging infrastructure to your contracts and quotes, that's one potential there. But then also looking at other things like microgrids and setting those up as you go too. Have a giant battery that you bring on site, set up the solar panels, like do whatever it is you need to do, because this electrification is going to be good for you in the long run.
There's a book by Bill Nussey called Freeing Energy. And when you read it, it talks about local energy, which is exactly what you just spoke about. And hydrogen is a part of the mix for sure in the future in some places. But today, especially if you're talking about green hydrogen, the economics of transporting hydrogen and using it through a fuel cell make it really difficult to think of that as a viable option, except in places where there really isn't any other good option today.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that, we talked about a 3 to 5 year trend a little bit ago. If I was also looking at a 5 to 10 year, I think distributed generation and microgrids are going to have a huge impact on both resiliency and local sourcing of electricity for transportation. So I think that's a really important piece to be thinking about now as well. Start planning for that.
Okay. There's one more question that just came in. Hopefully we can squeeze it in. We just have a couple minutes left. It is, to what degree should commercial vehicle operations or fleet be considering alternate fuel sources, including CNG, LPG, hydrogen, or anything else?
I think my answer is different now than if you would have asked me 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I probably would have had a little bit more fuel neutral focus on that. I think in a perfect world, fuel choice would be a thing, and the market would provide us with vehicles with which we could choose which fuel to put in them, at least to some extent. I think the supply side right now is trending electric, but I do think there are still good applications for the other fuels, and then be a case-by-case basis for an organization. It works and great.
I think we're going to see some new types of fuels. I think we're going to see synthetic fuels coming into play here. Things like DME, you'll probably see that at some point, or maybe even things like ammonia might have a place, maybe in marine and some other places. So I'm going to also echo, I think, again, local energy, microgrids, and batteries are going to be the dominant force in everything we've been talking about today.
Any final comments?
I rode in a fuel cell electric vehicle, Class 8 by Hyundai, which was a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, and came away very impressed. When you think about over the road trucks that go long distances every day, in order to store enough energy in the batteries to go the distances that they go, you're going to reduce your payload capacity dramatically, and it's going to be very expensive. So this is kind of a modified system that does both. The challenge in all of these alternative fuels is delivery of said fuel to the locations where the vehicles either dispatch out of or where they would need to refuel somewhere along their routes. So it remains to be seen exactly how this is all going to play out. But on the supply side, to Ryan's point, it very much feels like the battery electric and the fuel cell are the two dominant technologies that are emerging.
Yep. Right. Well, on that note, I'd like to thank everybody for some fantastic discussion and some great comments and insight. If anybody has any further questions in the audience, then feel free to send them or post them in the chat, and we'll make sure that they get distributed to the panel and get you an answer. So thanks, everyone, for taking the time to do this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I thank all of you too. I think it's fantastic that we're all focused on doing this.